Okay, so let's jump right into this really fascinating idea from the 15th century. It's a concept that completely reframes how we think about knowledge itself. It basically argues that the more we learn, the more we realize just how little we actually know. So who was the mind behind this wild paradox? A guy named Nicolaus of Cusa. And get this, he wasn't just a cardinal in the Catholic Church, he was also a brilliant mathematician and philosopher who really wanted to understand the absolute limits of human reason when it's staring into the face of the infinite.
And to explain his idea, he didn't write some super dense, impossible-to-read book. Nope. Instead, he used a simple, totally elegant geometric analogy that anyone can get. It perfectly illustrates this relationship between our finite minds and infinite truth. He called this whole idea Docta Ignorantia, which literally translates to learned ignorance. I know, it sounds like a complete contradiction, right? But for Cusa, this was the absolute peak of wisdom, to truly deeply learn the boundaries of what you can never know.
And this right here is his brilliant illustration. I want you to imagine that this perfect circle represents absolute, infinite truth. You know, God or the fundamental nature of reality, the whole shebang. And that polygon inside of it, well, that's us. That's our knowledge.
No matter how advanced we get, our understanding is always finite. It's got boundaries, it's got edges, it's got a limited number of sides, just like a polygon. It's this concrete, definable shape that's trying to make sense of a perfect, seamless form.
Now, as we learn more, as we read, as we run experiments, as we just gain life experience, we're basically adding sides to our polygon. A triangle becomes a square, which becomes a pentagon. Then a shape with 100 sides. It gets way more complex, and yeah, its edges get closer and closer to the curve of the circle. It starts to look a lot like the truth.
But here's the crucial point, and this is everything. It never actually gets there. You could add 1,000,000 sides, 1,000,000,000, heck, an almost infinite number of sides, but that polygon will always be made of tiny straight lines. It will never become the perfect continuous curve of the circle. That tiny space between the edge and the curve, that represents a fundamental gap we can never cross.
In Cusa's own words, there's just no proportion between the finite and the infinite. Our knowledge can always get more precise, more and more detailed, but it will always, fundamentally, be a different kind of thing than the truth it's trying to understand.
So Cusa gives us this really powerful way to think about the limits of our own minds. But what if this exact same problem, this idea of an imperfect approximation, also exists in our most foundational texts? It turns out this concept of multiple, finite versions all pointing toward a single truth has a really stunning parallel in the history of ancient scriptures.
So let's explore this. Let's jump back in time, even further back, to the 3rd century. There was this Christian scholar named Origen, and he was facing a really similar problem. He saw all these multiple, slightly different versions of the Old Testament floating around, and he had to ask, which one is the real one?
His solution was just monumental. It was a work called the Hexapla, and instead of picking one version and saying, this is it, he laid 6 different versions side by side in parallel columns. He wasn't trying to erase the differences, he was putting them right out there on display to be studied and compared.
Now, what's so interesting here is the totally different mindset. Our modern approach is usually to dig and dig, trying to find that one single original text. We're searching for the perfect circle. But Origen and the ancient world were much more comfortable with what scholars call textual plurality. For them, the meaning wasn't just in one perfect version, but in the conversation and the tension between all the different versions. And this brings us right into the present day. Believe it or not, this same tension, this pull between seeking a single perfect truth versus studying multiple imperfect approaches, is totally alive and well in the world of modern biblical scholarship.
This table illustrates the point perfectly. These are all major academic commentary series, but each one has its own priority, its own angle. The WBC tries to balance critical scholarship with faith. Hermeneia is all about historical critical purity. The NIGTC is for the language nerds, digging deep into the Greek. You see what's happening? Each one is its own highly complex polygon, using its unique shape and its unique sides to try and map the circle of the text's original meaning.
So, let's bring this all the way back around to Cusa's profound insight and what it really means for how we can approach knowledge today.
When you put it all together, Cusa's analogy and the history of textual scholarship seem to suggest that this whole quest for a final, perfect, all-encompassing answer might just be a fool's errand. Maybe that circle of absolute truth is just fundamentally beyond the reach of our polygon minds.
So maybe real wisdom, that learned ignorance, isn't about possessing the circle. Maybe it's about knowing, with humility and with clarity, the shape of your own polygon. It's about understanding the angles of your own perspective, the limits of your own methods, and the boundaries of your own understanding.
And that leaves us with a pretty challenging question for our own lives, doesn't it? In our world today, where we have access to more information than at any point in human history, where answers seem to be just a click away, what is the real value of accepting that some things are fundamentally unknowable? What changes when we stop trying so hard to become the circle and instead just focus on understanding our own polygon?